Hello, everyone. Welcome to CoreNet's 12th coffee hour session. We've been on for a few weeks now, and we're really grateful for all of you to be joining us week after week to have these conversations where we could share with each other our experiences and challenges and learn from each other. So, thanks again for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly go over some ground rules. So go to the next slide, Nitya. Sure. We are recording this session for the purposes of documentation for anyone who is not able to make it this afternoon. So in case if you have a problem with that, just let us know in the chat section and we'll make sure that you're out of the documentation. To save bandwidth, it would be great if you could keep yourselves on mute and turn off your camera unless you're speaking. हम सब हिंदी और अंग्रेजी दोनों में आसानी से बात कर सकते हैं, तो प्लीज किसी भी भाषा का इस्तेमाल करें जिसमें आपको आसानी लगे. There is ample time, especially for this session, as you may have noticed. While this is a coffee hour, we're going to extend the conversation to 5:15, and this is just so that all of you can ask as many questions and discuss as many things as you'd like with both our speakers today. So please feel free to use the chat section liberally and help yourselves to, unmute yourself if ever you want to speak up. Okay, open the next. Yeah. Okay. So very quickly, what we're going to do is just in the next few minutes, we'll do an intro and context setting that Priya would help for all of us to do. And then we'd have two presentations, very brief again, from Dr. Ramanathan and from Dr. Mandal on a few prompts that we've shared with them based on questions that have been emerging from all of us. And then we'll get into a 45-minute extended discussion between all of us. Over to the next, and if I could just give you a very quick update. So CoreNet, as you all know, has been an emerging community of practice. We're all part of it. At the moment, we stand at nearly 50 organizations. All of these research reports and several sort of metadata you can find on www.corenet.in. We're also actively using Slack as a means to share with each other many other links, etc., that we find, and also speak and make contact with each other. So please get there if you're not on it already. At the same time, two working groups have been set up. So please also you'll find information about this on Slack. And if you go to the next slide, yeah. Coffee hour sessions have been weekly, where every Thursday usually we meet from 4 to 5. And again, in case if you have suggestions for things we should be talking about in the future, please let us know. And just to give you some background on how we've been having conversations around ethics and equity, as you can see, as the community of practice was being set up, really one of the two goals was to bring about ethics and equity in practice. And we've done that through a series of events already. So if you go next, Nitya. So it started first with an ethics dialogue that we did early in June, where again, researchers came together to talk about specific challenges and approaches that they were already thinking about in phone surveys. Following that, we did a much more detailed conversation around informed consent around phone surveys in specific. And then in partnership with SRHM, we did a more detailed session, which was again a public session on ethics in SRHR research. And I guess now I could pass it on to Priya, who could give us some sense of where we are as a community and what particularly she is one of the anchors for CoreNet sees to come out of this conversation. Over to Priya.
Thanks, Ron. And actually, I'd first like to thank our guests, Dr. Mala Ramanathan and Dr. Mandal, who've agreed to join us in today's conversation. As many of you know, I can see most of you are regulars at this is not the first conversation on ethics. In fact, it's probably the fifth formal conversation we've had on ethics, but informally, there's been a lot of dialogue and discussions and FAQs and even a couple of blogs that were written around the ethics of mobile survey. And we all know the reason we were having these intense conversations as a community is because of the predicament of doing very rapid, prompt, responsive surveys on mobiles in many settings with subjects or respondents who we did not have prior engagement with. In some cases, some organizations did, but mostly the more often than not, the rule was we didn't. And it was also happening at a time of extreme distress, migration, and despair. And many of the questions we were asking around entitlements were related to the reason or the actual aspects of vulnerability that people were facing. Additionally, there were questions we were not asking but were very heightened aware of around experiences of violence within homes, which was surfacing inadvertently, even though ethically we may have bounded ourselves off from asking those questions. So in either case, respondents may have sought um, our interviewers for information and suggestions around, how to get entitlements or how to seek help, or the kind of concerns that they were facing. And we may have inadvertently in the first wave put our interviewers in a situation where they themselves were not equipped enough. And I'm saying all this with great transparency because some of our organizations went through IRB protocols and some didn't. As we convened as a community, which was a loosely formed community, we also knew that we wanted to set similar and high standards around ethics for the CONET community, that became a kind of a foundational pillar for CONET. Because of these experiences, not everybody was a researcher. A lot of people were doing responsive research, and the research itself was happening at a time of vulnerability. For all of these reasons, we wanted to kind of have a very uniform way to understand and commit to and incorporate and internalize ethics in our work. And that became the foundation of CONET, and therefore we've had many dialogues around it. At this point, both Mala and Subrata know that basically most of you have had those nuanced conversations, are coming with higher degree of awareness and thinking around this. Some of your questions have been shared with our speakers today. So they're not talking to people who don't know anything, but yet, as a community, which includes the ethicists, and today, we all have similar predicaments. How long will this continue? What happens when we go back to face interviews? And will mobile surveys become the norm? How do we continue to tax and burden ourselves and our research infrastructure as well as respondents on this way of engaging, if we believe that the information is critical and important because it's going to be used to shape public policy and public discourse. So with that, as always, a outer commitment that we know that this data is being collected because it's important, because we're going to do something strong and important with it. We will continue to have to collect research, but what we are trying to do is, as a community, be more bounded, more mindful, reduce the redundancy, therefore work together to really see who's doing what and what additional layers do we want to add and how do we complement each other. So there are a lot of things, there are lots of advances within the community we've made on this commitment to ethics. And so today is a conversation which is much more about from the other side as people who review protocols and work on in IRBs. Um, what is their experiences exactly at the same time in the last 6 months, and also just what are their reflections, experiences, and if an open conversation with us if we have any questions for them. So that's where we are. I kind of summarize where we were till today, and also today's conversation is with people, experts who are ethicists who have worked a lot in IRB review committees and review protocols, and it's an open space for you to interact with them after they have made their 10-minute presentations. So now, that's all from me. Rohan, back to you to set this
Great,
up and get the
great.
conversation.
Thanks, Priya. Nitya, if we could move to the next slide, and I could introduce our first speaker for today, who's Dr. Mala Ramanathan. Dr. Ramanathan teaches masters in public health at the Achyuta Menon Center for Health Science Studies, among other institutions. She was an ethics fellow at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health in 2002 and to 4, and since then has been part of the bioethics movement within the country. She's one of the working editors of the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and which is a leading bioethics journal published from India. And she's also the member secretary of the Institutional Ethics Committee of the Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute of Medical Science and Technology in Trivandrum since 2014. So, without much further ado, I would like to give it to Dr. Mala Ramanathan to share her thoughts with us.
Good evening. Just so that you at least know what I look like, I turned on the video just for a moment and I will switch it off to save the bandwidth presently. Good evening, and I am really glad to have a chance to talk to researchers, particularly those who are engaged with communities and the issues that confront them currently in this pandemic situation, and also the kind of response that we have seen through the pandemic. I use partial response because this response is not a response as it is a political response, and they don't seem to always work in tandem. When we look at ethics committees, I have to set the stage for those of you by telling you that ethics committees, when you look at the legal framework and how they are set up and what means they have to deal with these new challenges, I can't explain it without telling you a little bit about the legal framework under which IECs are now functioning in India. To ensure that IECs have autonomy and are not tied to institutions, most of the ethics committee members are not affiliated to the institution. And depending on the discipline, the people who are in the ethics committee can come from different geographical regions or from different parts of the country or even across a state from different places, which means in-person meetings have to be pre-planned and organized. As internal members have multiple responsibilities, they are both, staff at the institution where they work, and the IEC responsibility is added as an extra work for them. They don't give it as much priority as researchers would like them to do, because they have other things as well to do. Some institutions actually fund and staff IECs very well with paid employees. Otherwise, employees who have salaries from other means serve also with IECs. This system was working very well in the pre-COVID mechanism because meetings were pre-planned and regular. And the regulatory requirement was that meetings have to be in person, there has to be discussion in person and decision making jointly. The pandemic made this impossible, and the larger an ethics committee was and the more diverse its engagement, the more difficult it became to conduct any ethics committee meeting where ethics members meet in person. Given the sheer size and diversity of members and skills, it's also difficult to get all of them together on prefixed dates as we did earlier. This is not because they were unwilling, but submissions for IECs could no longer be predicted at specific times. In especially hospital-like situations or even otherwise, we are unable to fix, because at any point in time, some researcher is in quarantine, some researcher is tested positive, some researcher is looking after family, there is a whole gamut of other things that are happening. So given that fluidity in status, it became very difficult to prefix dates and hold people. It was like we would hold people almost to ransom. So therefore, we shifted to submissions online, one at a time, not in bulk at any time, because it was unfair to demand that people have to give it at a specific time. And not everyone could manage to do. And in the initial phase, not much research happened anyway, except for COVID related research. The third one was research on COVID-19 context and other forms of research which are, back with COVID. Let us suppose you're looking at epilepsy care. What happens to epilepsy care due to COVID? Or what, suppose you were just looking at health seeking. What happens with regard to healthcare seeking and the pandemic situation? So it's not for us now. Suddenly the ethics committee was confronted with, we don't need to only protect the human research participants, but also it is important for IEC to caution principal investigators on the human cost of data collection and how to protect researchers as much as how to protect the participants. You have to realize IECs in the pre-COVID phase were considered a nuisance and tolerated by institutions, even though, particular members were respected. Ethics committees were not, very well endowed, and they were usually understaffed. This whole thing functioned because the actual work had to be done in spurts. But in the post-COVID phase, you need continuity of engagement. IECs needed to respond and had to do so fast to enable researchers to catch up with the ever-changing scenario. For example, I'll give you a medical example. You have a test kit and the government has given permission to test it in some particular district, but people are in another district. There were so many restrictions for mobility that by the time people could move from the district where they are located to the district where they need to be, the kind of clusters of cases they were finding in the other place had reduced. So these were things which mean ethics committees had to act fast. So what did we do? We looked at existing laws and developed new guidance for this. One for dealing with COVID studies, which were seen as needing a very, very expedited process. So we had a turnover time of 72 hours, and another one for dealing with regulatory or other studies, which have to go on and needed very careful scrutiny, both from a legal perspective because of the new drugs and clinical trials rules, which actually is not only for medical or clinical studies, it is also for social science research involving human subjects. And we also took guidance of the Indian Council of Medical Researchers bioethics guidelines. The ICMR guidelines have sections on social science and public health, but those were developed in the relatively naive, and I say that very consciously, periods of 2017. These sections on social science and public health are not very independent of the regulations envisaged for clinical and epidemiological studies, and that forms the bread and butter of most health research. So given this, the way to work them means you have to be innovative. You have to think out of the box, and that is why we developed SOPs. These SOPs were approved by the ethics committee members and the institute, and then by April 1st, we were in place to act. It's not easy to get IEC members to meet through, various platforms, because at different stages, people were in different problematic situations, even ethics committee members themselves. And, we don't select ethics committee members for their ability to deal with electronic platforms. We select ethics committee members for their willingness to review protocols and the particular skills that they bring to the table, which means we have to tolerate, different abilities, different connectivity issues, varying skills in dealing with electronic media and platforms, and competing demands for time from IEC members as well. Because we are confronted with not merely individual risks, but also familial risks, not only for researchers, but for also IEC members. And many of the IEC members, remember, are also frontline healthcare workers or frontline workers who are providing other forms of care for, communities. Therefore, we had to continue to review through a consultative process. So IEC Secretariat took responsibility to handle that. We kept the stuff going, but I have to tell you, it takes a lot of work because IECs were understaffed to start with, and this did not change in the pandemic situation. We had to take greater workloads because people who are, working within the IEC have to come from far away places, have to travel long distances, don't have transport. There was no public transport, and which meant some of them had no, internet connectivity at home. They did not have laptops. They couldn't afford one, or the only one they had at home was being used by children because very soon schools reopened. So we had to find a way. So we took submissions, we circulated them, collated comments, we circulated the collated comments, and we needed members also because at different times different people were not available. So it is very good to have ethics committee members who can be, social scientist, ethicist, dietitian, public health researcher, ethicist, social scientist. Multiple identities really help because you cannot predict who will be unavailable at any minute. And it is very important in this current premise because it's after new drugs and clinical trials rules were put in place in 2019 March. So we had to obey the legal requirements as well. So we allowed telephone consent. We allowed for recording of telephonic consent. Sometimes we only asked for, a text message to indicate autonomous decision making, saying, I agree to your request to participate or something like this. We actually, for the first time, permitted collection of health outcomes through telephone calls, which were minimally invasive because the alternative was asking people to come to risky, get researchers or patients to come and meet each other, which was more risky. So we allowed telephone prompted collection. Many of these things we did a work in progress, and we are still learning as we move on. And even when it comes to social science research, we did manage with telephonic interviews, but we did have to go out of our way to manage consent process. And there we were not satisfied because some people were uncomfortable with recorded consents, which is where we requested, not everyone has smartphones which can, receive large messages. So we had to operate with texted messages in local language. So we used all of those options to ensure that people in spite of all these limitations, took autonomous decisions to engage with researchers. That is just what I wanted to say. The rest of it I will deal with when I answer questions. And please feel free to ask questions about, because it's not only clinical research that the ethics committee dealt with. We dealt with social science research in health within the public health school as well. Thank you.
Great, great. Thanks so much, Dr. Ramanathan. These are indeed things that we saw only from the outside as we spoke about challenges in the interface between the researcher and the IRBs or the IECs. This is really, really valuable. Great. Over to Dr. Mondal. And we're also really grateful again for not just Dr. Ramanathan, but also for Dr. Mondal to join us. He's currently working as the advisor for monitoring, evaluation, and learning at USAID India. With a PhD in population science, Dr. Mondal has over 25 years of experience in academic research, public health research, and operation research in the field of human development, demography, reproductive health and rights, and healthcare financing. He's trained in human research ethics and has also been serving at a number of institutional review boards for more than 20 years. And additionally, he's also published widely on health and nutrition issues and M&E methodologies in peer-reviewed international journals and edited books. Today, Dr. Mondal will be sharing with us some basics around ethics, and then and go on to what challenges he's been seeing in the IRB processes. in the past few months. Over to Dr. Mondal.
Thank you, Ron. Just to show my face that so you understand that who am I, how I look like. I'll put on my video and start. Uh, First of all, good afternoon to everyone. And I'm very pleased to join with you all and talk about something which is very close to my heart. In the year of 2000, actually, I came to a contact with some researcher from National Institute of Health and got interested in this subject on research ethics. And that's where I got my first very short training on research ethics. So since then, I am trying to promote this among many researchers in India. Long back, I and one of my friends tried to organize some workshops to call many researchers from research organization as well as donors to talk about and sensitize about research ethics. But it was unfortunate that only couple of people attended this participation and participated. So this was a real frustration for us. We wanted, but nobody was interested. But last year, so same both of us conducted another workshop on research ethics in Trivandrum, and that generated a big demand. And some of the universities now really coming to us and asking to repeat the same. So with this kind of interest like yours, so I'm really very much excited to talk about our experience working in this field as a researcher as well as a reviewer of different protocols in different situations, particularly in the context of COVID. But before I go to my slide, I just would like to say as a disclaimer that all my responses are my personal views, not that of my organization. So I represent here as a sectoral expert. So therefore, don't consider me as representing USAID and talking to you about research ethics. So basically, whenever we review, so three basic principles we need to really keep in mind, that respect, beneficence, and justice. So if we keep in mind these three core principles, this is universal principle, and then probably you will see that you can really maneuver many of your challenges that you are thinking how you will conduct research. So if you keep these three in mind, I'll at the same time, it is contextual based on local environment, local culture, local laws, and local policies. So as we work in India, so we operate in the environment of India government laws and policies. Ron, go to the next one. Okay. So, so when we say that we need to really respect the research subject, so there are many diminished autonomy we see.
Others having problem
You
hearing
need to
Dr.
really
Mandal?
keep proper care when you are interviewing. Okay. Is there better now or it is same?
Better.
Loud and clear from my side.
Better. But
okay.
Subrata, now that I've interrupted you, our time is short, so I would ask you to expedite it a bit.
Okay. So I quickly go to, okay, go to the next slide, please. So this is very important. Whenever we do research, please see that we always work on no harm policy. So do not harm to the beneficiaries or your respondent. And it applies to individual as a participants as well as the community as a whole. So therefore, you always need to see the benefit versus risk ratio, whether you have a +1 ratio represent +1 or not. If it is negative, definitely you should take care of in terms of benefit, how you can provide that. Go to the next. And third is very, very important at the context of COVID, fair distribution of burdens and benefit of research. Now here actually it is coming, when it is coming telephone surveys, those who have telephone numbers, those telephone numbers are with you, you are reaching to them repeatedly. So this is not a fair distribution of research burden. So you need to keep in mind and think about how you can maneuver about it. Okay, so quickly, I will talk about few challenges we see in India when we do a lot of reviews. So one basic problem we see, we are not fortunate like Dr. Mala working in an institutional setting with some kind of full support from the institution, but we operate in a very, very non-governmental settings where voluntarily everything works. With some fees collected from reviews to run the secretariat. Otherwise, all services are voluntary. So therefore, we really do not get many people, although there are many people who are trained and experienced in research, can do review, but they do not participate in reviews. So this is a big challenge. So it is not institutionalized. So all of our efforts are part-time and voluntary. So we have all full-time work, and then as a part-time, we provide this support to researcher. Another issue, the environment we operate is that most IRBs do not accept external protocols. So they have institutional IRBs. They only review their own institution's protocol, do not have that autonomy. That's why the conflict of interest is a major issue in those IRBs. And apart from researcher, so researcher point of view, so they expect that ethical review process is a kind of hurdle for them. They need quick approval, and also really we see that people do not have much motivation and interest to invest in time and resources, because the time you need to spend on for example, as a researcher, reviewers, we spend almost 8 to 10 hours per review. So this is a huge time commitment from a reviewer's point of view. But at the same time, we do not see that kind of reciprocation from researcher. When they come very casually and expect that everything will be approved. So I think that is some of the challenges we face. This is a generic challenges. I will come to very specific challenges that we are facing during COVID situation. Go to the next. Yes. Now, when lockdown started in the month of March, that time itself we started getting protocol that some people have approached us that we have a scheduled research to be done. So can you approve it? So we really taken a call that there should not be any research allowed, at least from our perspective, because research is not that moment, it was not a priority. Priority was really helping people in their life. So research can wait, particularly social and behavioral research. Medical research is definitely, as Dr. Malla says, is a priority at many times, but social and behavioral research can really wait. But so that's why it was not only in India. We could see that it was a global stand. There was no social research happening globally. But then later on, during June to September, we started getting many protocols which really talked about that how we can see that what is the kind of situation of people during COVID. So therefore, we started allowing essential research, but no face-to-face interaction. So face-to-face interaction actually started last month. In the month of October, we started providing approval for face-to-face interaction with a lot of safeguards and SOPs for both researcher as well as for participants. I think this is the perspective, but I will come very particularly what was really striking during the second partial lockdown phase, when we are getting more and more protocols of telephone surveys. What are those issues? I think it will really helpful for you. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, I think so. What some of the common concerns of IRB members during COVID-19, so when we accepted protocol, really we have seen that people do not recognize that mobile number as personally identified information, PII. So this is really, people do not understand. They want research, but without recognizing that as a personally identified information, not recognizing that large list of mobile number has a huge potential commercial value, need really protection. So it is a kind of rampant use of these mobile numbers. I think those in the protocol and generalized telephone survey findings for the entire population really bothered us, that social exclusion lead to bias result. So therefore, people did not see that how they are interpreting the findings of the research they have done. And research burden for mobile owners. So this is another one. So people said that, okay, I have a list of mobile numbers, I am reaching to them for my research. So this is a huge burden for mobile owners. So it is research burden is not distributed. Asking frontline workers to share mobile numbers of beneficiaries, or asking them to obtain permission to use mobile number and agree to participate. I think this is something we take it granted that frontline workers are ready to help us, without thinking that, so there are many more infection related precaution or safeguards need to be given to them before we ask this. So without asking or taking that much of care, people just ask them to do this. But when it comes to face-to-face interview, not recognizing risk over benefit to participants. So people are reaching to beneficiaries and asking question, but not recognizing the risk they are carrying, going from another place to one place, maybe a risk of infection, not recognizing the risk of research team as well. So I think those are some of the very common concerns we have, and every time we try to provide as much as kind of support to researchers so that they can really take care of these kind of issues when they come for review. And for your information, in our IRBs, we never really rejected any protocol. Always we said that, okay, so these are some of the ways you can really think of, and then you can adjust and then go for research. I think those are some of the principles we follow in this. So telephone service has very many methodological issues. I know you all aware of. I am not going to explain it. You have discussed this thoroughly earlier. I'm really want to spend 1 minute in the next slide. Rohan. So You need to understand that making fast call is an issue. It may be unsolicited call. So therefore, without somebody's permission, you cannot do that. When you are not going with a so you are not doing any benefit for them. So that's why we need to think about, but there are ways to do that. And really people do not care about do not disturb registry that in India we have with mobile operator. So really this is a common mistake. Possible misuse of mobile number that I have mentioned it. And also need to think about that many times people really club intervention with the research. So intervention, you can really reach out to people because you are providing support to them. But when it's research, you are going to select people. You are not providing any support. So therefore, you need to be kind of your approach would be little different. And when you go for face-to-face interview, you know the situation, how they are in, and then you know the environment, and then you start a dialogue. But when you are calling somebody, they may be in a midst of some of their serious engagement, and calling is a huge interruption, and that lead to some kind of problem and harm to them. I think that is also another issue with the mobile interaction. Going to the next one. Some of the ways probably you can think of. I have mentioned here some ways people are doing it, because telephone research is not a new thing. It is actually, it happens for number of occasions, and many countries are doing for long. So random digit dialing can be one. So that does not really take you to the situation where you do not distribute your research burden. Respondent-driven sample also is another methodology can be adopted. So we many a times say, so you can do local newspaper or cable advertisement request for participation, or mobile, give a mobile call to give a missed call for their participation, or you engage local NGOs to recruit people. So these are some of the ways, or prepare a small card for the and writing explaining the purpose of the research and provide a mobile number to really call back. I think these are some of the ways you can actually minimize a lot of harm. That when you are not, people are voluntarily participating in this way, and also people participate on their own time. You are not really making an on-time call. So I think those are some of the ways you can think about. Go to the next, Rohan. For face-to-face interview, so when we started giving approval, so I am drawing some of the lesson we have learned from a large-scale surveys happened in Rajasthan for AP 2020. So they have used many of these measures, and so their experience was very, very kind of encouraging. And in the same way, National Family Health Survey is also taking the similar measure for their face-to-face survey. It really need to protect both research team as well as the community or respondent. So therefore, you have to be really prepared. I think, please, I request Rohan to share this presentation to all so that I don't have to go to each point here. So I think this is something you can all go through. And next. Now, question is, as I said, we have very limited bandwidth to really support all the researcher, social science researcher in India. So it's a huge $1 million question where you need to go. I know you people go to only handful of IRBs, but if you go to any search engine in India and search IRBs in India, you will get more than 1,000 IRBs. But in reality, really they are not, all are not available for social science review. So many uh, are under medical institutions and all, so they rarely or I don't know, probably Dr. Mala can talk more about it, but so they support many a times medical research. I have the experience in reaching out to medical college for approval, so they have denied that, they did not take it. But otherwise, IRBs are usually formed to approve their own research protocol. This is very common in private IRBs. Is a huge conflict of interest. I think I leave with you with this, and then I am really happy to take any question in the question answer session. What I say is that there are people who always, one kind of people say that IRB always as a restriction for research, but there are people who always say, go to IRB, they are really are there to help you, so it really pays well. So therefore, so even if you feel any kind of hurdle at any point of time, come to us. There are ways to take to in the right path. Thank you.
Great, great. Thanks so much, Dr. Mondal. I'll now invite Priya to share with us some of her thoughts and take the discussion forward. Over to Priya.
No, this was excellent. I'm sorry. Can you hear me, Ron? I can't see my screen
Yes,
for some
Priya.
reason.
Yes,
I've
yes,
lost
we
it.
can.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. So no, firstly, I want to thank both Shubroto and Mala. They were very interesting, complementary presentations, and really added to the nature of discussions we've been having within this group. The perspective of how difficult it is to constitute IRB members, the typical skill sets they come with, and what needed therefore to be evoked in COVID. I mean, that was really interesting, Mala, and also Shubroto, your perspective on going over systematically some of the issues that we've actually discussed around mobile surveys, but also your emphasis on whether researchers tend to take this casually, or as I kind of altered a little bit in my chat, maybe not casually, but mechanically, because I know nobody can take it casually because there are many, many timelines that are dependent on studies. So even if they don't fully understand the importance, significance of each and every comment from the IRB, um, you don't take it casually because many, many things are dependent on the approvals. So it does sometimes become mechanical. And I think in COVID, what's really been a special space for us is these dilemmas and predicaments became very real for researchers. So I don't think there was any space to take this casually. I think everybody was impacted by COVID, and the public discourse around COVID really impacted the nature of research. What researchers did. So, and I just also want to say that having been managing large research before I came to the foundation, I personally have been in situations where all the guidance that we got from IRB was useful, and we actually had unanticipated events, and we had to actually address them in the field. There were sometimes situations which became very political, very communal, and had we not gone through the protocol, and had our researchers not been so well trained, and the protocols were not so strict, I don't think the research could have been carried out without any stigma. So I agree with Shubroto that the guidance is very helpful. And it's only over time that researchers begin to understand how helpful it is. Until you actually face an incident, you wouldn't know um, why this guidance is helpful. So with that, I mean, those are my overarching comments. So with that, I open it up. I don't see too many questions here. Oh, but I do see from Anirudh. So Anirudh, would you like to start, please? And you can ask your question yourself.
Yes, sure. Thanks so much. Thanks to both Dr. Mala and Dr. Mondal for really summarizing a lot of the challenges that IRBs face. I think my question was just sort of more on a specific point that Dr. Mondal made. So it was about the IRBs that are primarily formed to sort of review and screen internal proposals. And I guess you mentioned that they might face some sort of conflict of interest. So I just sort of wanted to learn a little bit more about that. What might be the potential risks there? And full disclosure is, of course, that I'm speaking on behalf of sort of an IRB that was initially formed to primarily screen internal proposals. But we are now reviewing proposals that are submitted to us by other organizations as well. So, I mean, I think just from your experience, maybe if there's something that we should specifically be watching out for. Thank you.
So this is from my personal experience, Anirudh, that so before a couple of our colleagues with similar mindset form the IRBs and all, we really kind of travel from pillar to post to have our protocols reviewed. And every time we encounter that they really do not accept external protocol. So we know that there are many IRBs in their institution, but really do not do not accept external protocol. But when I say that it is a conflict of interest, now Dr. Mala actually very well explained this in an institutional setting, how they have kind of organized themselves as a institutional ethical committee. But when you only review your own protocol, so I will always say that so IRB should not be really by intent is not for only review your own protocol. Then it always in conflict of interest should arise. So therefore you need to think about that when it is publicly available and with full disclosure, then only it can become a kind of open for all.
Thanks, Shubroto. Angela, do you want to go next?
Do you think I can add a bit to the?
Yes, yeah, Mala, please go ahead, and then maybe Angela was trying to speak, but she can go after
I just
you.
need to add because, see, I think the kind of framework in which we work in India, Dr. Shubroto Mondal is talking about ethics committees as they function in the UK, where it's like jury duty. People are selected from communities with different skill sets, and counties or other groups have their ethics committees. But that is also a health system which is organized under NHS. Whether we want to say that it's fully functional or not, there is a kind of a modicum of universal health coverage, or at least a fig leaf of that, which exists. And therefore, the national NHS or the UK has this system. But within India, the way, for sexual harassment prevention, there's supposed to be an internal complaints committee, which is operational at a district level, in theory. Whether it exists in practice is a different issue. But we don't have such a mechanism or even a framework to set that up in India, in the current way that ethics committees are organized. So the only way to prevent conflicts of interest where institutional, when Dr. Mandal talks about conflict of interest, he means that the institution's interest is paramount because it is interested in getting protocols reviewed, because there is a funding attached to that, and that gives rise to conflict of interest, because such a committee might, I say this with caution, overlook any breaches of, requirements, safety requirements and other things in the urge to get institutional funding support. But if an ethics committee within an institution is set up in a manner that the institutional members are minimal and cannot make any decisions, and almost all decisions are made externally, and that is how legally we are required to set up committees, we can actually overcome this problem of potential conflicts of interest. Having said that, that is what renders those committees very difficult to run, because the members come all over the place. Does it help?
Yes, Dr. Malla, this is really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely adds a nuance. Okay, Angela, you had your hand up?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now
Yeah.
I can hear you. I couldn't hear you for a
Hi,
brief.
Angela. Go ahead.
Hi. I just, mine is not so much of a question to be answered necessarily, but a thought. But my first and foremost comment is to really appreciate hosting a session like this, and due thanks to Subroto for sharing this session with us. I think I might have completely missed it. I also wanted to share that about 2 years ago, the Catalyst Group formed their own IRB. But really, it was not, and this is where my comment is coming in, it was with the interest of furthering ethical work, not just research in the social development space, particularly in health and livelihoods. And I hear what both Dr. Malla and Dr. Subroto has spoken, and what you have spoken, Priya, and agree with you. And I wonder if the IRBs, I know I've heard about the challenges of running an IRB, but I think therein is the opportunity to not just shape the ethical research per se, but actually shape ethical work or ethical initiative on the ground, because we have seen and we've experienced through this COVID how with all good intentions, rushed intervention can actually have, can actually set ethics aside. And it's not just ethics in a vacuum, but those that have long-term problems and challenges coming forward. So just a query or a comment to say, is there an expanded role for IRB? Is there a responsibility for IRB to push the agenda of ethical action in development forward? Over.
So I think, Angela, you were right. So when many of our researchers came to us in the initial stage of pandemic, I always give one example that many of us really work in a disastrous relief. When we go for disastrous relief, we always know that there are certain needs of the people. We reach out to them, fulfill their need, and collect lots of data that what is their further needs, and come back and then prepare ourselves to go back again. I think that is the spirit and intent, that how we should collect information. It is not always research. So if you need to think about what is your intent, we really always ask the question, what is your intent in the research? So therefore, at that point of time, it is really very simple that what needs I should be doing. So I think that spirit should come from everybody's heart, and then information collection probably will not be a kind of very kind of problematic appears.
Can I add my 2 bit here?
Yeah, please.
You see, we learned the hard way because as a public health school, we got involved not as an ethicist, but as a faculty in a public health school. We ourselves and our students were involved in a relief effort. When I say relief, I don't mean like flood or something, but in dealing with communities who were suddenly confronted with this issue. And we realized that the frontline workers, the people who send out in the early phase of COVID, it was not necessarily mental health. Okay. The young people, the other data, the people who are there to support, who are offering support, may not know what they are going to be confronted with. Anyone who dares to send people out, even to do, relief work or anything, needs to have back end. And we realized that the questions were fast from the communities we were reaching out to. One were health-related, COVID-related questions. But the other set of questions was social, embedded in the socio-economic context of lives. Now you're asking someone who's tested positive to isolate. They have a 6-month-old child whom they are breastfeeding. How do they isolate a 2-year-old from the mother when the 6-month-old child is with the mother? How do you give that input? Our frontline workers didn't know how to answer that question. So if you don't create backups to, with experience to deal with the medical and the socio-dynamic questions out there, people who may be elders, who may be experienced researchers who've been there, done that, it takes a lot of skills to be able to hold, even at long distance, the hands of these people who feel terrified, even when you're doing, only interventions and don't intend to do research. Those people out there doing good need someone else holding their hands. And that is a fundamental responsibility of anyone at the helm of affairs. Whether we do research, decent human beings, you cannot send people out to help without being able to help them to help others. And that is what we learned in the initial phases. It was incidental that learning helped me in good stead when I continue to be in the ethics committee. So just remember that, it's not ethics committees and ethics committees. Any action which we necessarily engage with in communities, we need to have certain skill sets. And if we don't have them, we need to have recourse to them. Before we dare to jump into, into a pool, we need to know if we know to swim or if someone can rescue us in that process. And that backing is the very essence for any intervention, whether we are doing it for research or otherwise. And I just thought I'll throw in that 2 bit.
Thank you.
So there is a question from Shruti. So do you feel a need for watching body for IRBs to coordinate? I think really coordinate can facilitate this because definitely there are, first of all, you need to know that where IRBs are there. So how many IRBs you have within your community, wherever you stay, and then coordinate. So when you go for coordination, so this is a huge issue. I have faced it, but I think individually we are not able to manage anything, but collectively probably we can manage many things. So coordinate type of kind of body probably can help to do that. But I had another question from your group that somebody asked that, can we set up an IRB to help us? I think this question you need to think twice, thrice, fourth time, because setting up IRB needs to be thought through because this is a big investment to be made. So far, it is working voluntarily. but I know that going forward, people are getting fatigue in reviewing every week 3-4 proposal, spending 40 hours, 50 hours in a week to really support you. People are getting fatigue. So in 20 years, I have not done that, but I have seen that people are really leaving IRBs. They do not have bandwidth to do that. So you need to think about that. So how you can really help and make a professional kind of field that ethical review and things like that can happen.
I can tell you that it is now not possible unless you set it up with some kind of legal framework, because IRBs need to be registered with the Department of Health Research, DHR. And therefore, and in the past, I think in Mumbai, there has been an effort with Sehat and other groups trying to come together, multiple institutions together, offering to run an IRB, either situated in a particular institution, but having membership from across multiple institutions, which would serve the needs of, if it proves to be not economical or not enough proposals come up from one institution, 5, 6, 7, 8 institutions together set up an IRB to cater to the needs of those institutions. In that case, that ethics committee would be anchored in these multiple institutions with stakeholders from all these multiple institutions. It could still be voluntary, but the burden would be less. Second is that reviewing is a skill. You become better at it as you do it. Therefore, if you set up an IRB which will receive one proposal a month, the skill building doesn't happen. That is why it is good if, in a geographical region, institutions come together to think of setting up a common IEC which would cater to their needs, or similar kind of work, institutions with similar kind of work, regardless of geographical locations, come together to set up an IRB. It would need to be funded, but that can be supported through, the institutional support itself. So you can even think of that. In the past, such an institution did function within Sehat, where I think Sehat, Seva Rural, and one other group had come together, and I can't recollect that. It was about 10 years ago that they did run an IR ethics committee to cater to the multiple needs of these all these groups together. And it has been done in the past. So it's not unknown.
Great. Thanks so much for this, Dr. Mala and Mandal. I think maybe Angela has a related question. The second one, Angela, do you want to ask that?
No, yeah, I was just wondering, what is the platform? We were talking about research, and now we are, I know that our partners and our nurses are being asked to enroll, not to be vaccinators, but vaccinated. So these kind of large scale government programs, what is the platform for ethical action there? And I'm sorry if I'm asking an obvious question. Pardon my ignorance in this matter.
Are you saying that in certain groups, the government is enrolling health system staff for being vaccinated?
Yeah.
Angela, are you saying they're part of trials, the phase 3-4 trials, or are you saying that when vaccine is available, they will be
they're mysterious about that. The municipal corporation is mysterious about that. I would imagine it's trials because they're asking it now. Both from I believe that the government staff is already enrolled, and they're now pushing civil society and private sector to also enroll their health workers for being vaccinated and vaccinators.
I mean, my assumption to begin with, I mean, there's, of course, our guests are there, but I have a colleague, I don't know if she's still there, Kayla, on the chat. I would imagine that all of these trials would be completely voluntary with informed consent. I cannot imagine it would be otherwise. So when
I'm
you
sure
are
they're
saying,
writing it up that way, but that is not the way a user is perceiving it. For sure.
One
interesting.
of the prerequisites for if it goes through an ethics review, if it goes through an ethics review, the ethics committees systematically forbid institutional members from participating. That is one thing that could be done. The second one, because I think it's a political engagement as much as it is an ethical engagement, it would be very important for the professional bodies to come out with statements. So if they are nurses, the private sector working nurses, to come out, to be apprised of this and to come out with a statement in the press or something, saying that what are the risks, etc. So that there is a professional body backing such choices to participate or to not to participate. That would help when individuals need to resist.
Right. Thank you.
I think we're close to time, Rohan. So we may need to start wrapping up.
Yes. Are there any other questions that there are? Please feel free to write them here, or also we can share with you in the summary that we write email addresses for both Dr. Ramanathan and Dr. Mondal. And if it's okay, you can write.
And also, Mala had responded to some of the questions you had shared with her, Rohan. Maybe
Yes.
with Mala's consent, she can look at it once more. And if Subhrata wants to add to it, we can also make it part of the summary you publish.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
And also, this is from my side that as a kind of researcher in this sector, so whenever you feel like you need any consultation, so anytime you reach out to me, and then I'm always here to help you.
Great. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you so much.
And also, Dr. Mala, for your guidance. I think also the piece that we just discussed about institutions coming together to think about what more deeper collaborations there can be, also in terms of setting up an IRP. We'd also want to reflect with the larger group. So we do that and we'd keep you posted. So thanks so much,
So
everyone, for
I
your
just
time.
want to put one more point in your thoughts when you are
Yes,
thinking
please.
about institution coming together.
Mommy,
Now, currently we have started getting many protocols from researcher from the universities, students. They go for primary data collection and all. They come for reviews.
I'm going for a walk.
So therefore, you keep that also in mind to support them.
Right. Okay. Great. That would be useful. Great.
Extremely
All
important,
right.
Rohan, that when you do all of that, to remember to go back and revisit equity issues.
Yes.
Please do remember, because not all researchers are well endowed with funds to even pay for an ethics review. Students are one such criteria.
Great. These are really valuable. So thank you. And I think what we would do is also, as we are thinking about this, we'd again like to request you for your time and seek your guidance. So thank you again for this. Just very quickly, next steps on this. We are breaking next week just because everyone is taking a break in general. So we will meet again on the 19th of November, where we speak with Tej, who's been working with us a little bit on the web platform, and he'll talk about this community that comes together around data, and we'll sort of hear a showcase on Data Meet, a project that Tej has been leading for a few years now. Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks again to Dr. Ramanathan and to Dr. Mundal for taking out their time. Thanks to Priya for helping us put all of this together. And thank you to all of you again for joining in and for your questions and thoughts. We'll be in touch. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye.